Hey y'all, it is the NFT Roundtable and it's Friday, September 10th, 2021. I'm your host, Iris Nevins. I'm the co-founder of Daima, and today I'm talking to Jake Sally, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Jadu. Jadu is a super interesting augmented reality platform that launched in 2020, and it allows fans to interact with holograms of their favorite artists and musicians. So I'm super excited to dig into the story of Jadu and how Jadu is looking into or approaching NFTs. And yeah, happy to have you. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome.
So what feels like the best place to jump off? We could kind of start at the inception of Jadu, which I think is really interesting. So maybe we jump in there.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Cool. So I've had the pleasure of working with Asad J. Malik, who is our CEO, for the better part of 3 or 4 years now in a different capacity. This was really when he was coming up as a independent augmented reality director that was building some of the first experiences that were made for projects like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap headset. And we were really pushing the boundaries of what was possible with those devices. And
Could you,
we had a really good run.
before we go a little
Yeah,
further, for folks who don't know what augmented reality is, could you explain that?
yeah. So augmented reality is adding a digital layer that's superimposed on top of your physical reality. And the complexity of that digital layer and its interaction with physical reality depends on the type of hardware and software that's being used to project it. So
Mm-hmm.
at its base form, I think a lot of people have seen this and it's been popularized in the form of face filters, which are huge for platforms like Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
And on the more complex side of things, and really where we're seeing this entire space to going towards, is it actually having much more context. So being able to, if there's a physical item in the foreground, it actually, the digital item can move behind it as though it were physically there, or really starting to understand if I hold out my hand, it can recognize hand gestures,
Mm-hmm.
the object or character being able to react based on my voice or inputs that I have. It's
Right.
really exciting, honestly, right now. And this is why we built Jadu, because there were kind of all of these projects we were building using these high powered multi-thousand-dollar augmented reality headsets that they went on your head. They were a little clunky, but they had the juice
Mm-hmm.
to do some cool things. And we took these projects all over the world. We went to the Sundance Film Festival, Tribeca Film Festival. We had installations in the Barbican in London. But fundamentally, there was always kind of this issue that we were running into, which is we can't reach a ton of people. In
Mm-hmm.
its best case scenario, these museum situations or these film festivals, you're reaching a couple thousand people. And we really love that, but there's such a wider swath of people that we believe are really interested in augmented reality if they only have the tools and access,
Mm-hmm.
and if
And
it's really easy to do.
when you
One of our,
say you
yeah.
felt like you couldn't reach, you couldn't reach as many people. Is that because they would have to have the device, and not everyone's gonna have a device like a special headset?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple pieces. One of those is the barrier to entry is really high. The hardware itself, the Magic Leap and HoloLens were both thousands of dollars, so very cost prohibitive. But let's say you did have one of those devices, there's still this fundamental fear that humans have of putting things on their face, which, I think reasonable. But, the trade-off is if you do, you get kind of infinite augmented reality world. So, is the juice worth the squeeze? I think will, yet to be determined. But one thing that is clear is that the hardware capabilities of current generation mobile phones has kind of hit this inflection point where you can deliver really compelling, really rich augmented reality experiences in the ways that we were delivering for film festivals. Now people have that in their pocket. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the inception of Jadu is look, the hardware's finally gotten there. We think there's something really rich we can do, and we can reach, millions of people in a way that was not previously possible.
Okay. Awesome. And so, and then you were talking about some examples of augmented reality
Mhm.
projects. I think you named two.
Yeah, so we had this project, Terminal 3. I think it's the first time I cried doing an XR experience. The setup is you take on the role, you put on the headset, and you're taking the role of a airport security officer, and you are actually interviewing, using your voice, an augmented reality hologram of a perceived Muslim American person. And this is,
Mm-hmm.
we use a technique called volumetric capture, where we use a ton of cameras to capture a 3D representation of this person. And we basically had a branching narrative where you actually get to ask questions of the person, they give answers, and over time, you come to the conclusion, and you have to decide, will this person be let into the country or not? And the experience ends, you go to walk out, and we kind of set dressed this entire thing, and it was an interrogation room. We had two-way mirrors, we had little cameras and everything, so you really felt a sense of presence in this time and place with someone who looks pretty realistic. And as you go to exit, instead of actually leaving the experience, you walk into another room. And in that room is the real life person that we had turned into a hologram. And so now the person has a conversation with the real person about their decisions, what the process was like for them. And for us, this, I think, is one of the big building blocks of like why we love augmented reality compared to other mediums like virtual reality, which is this idea that when you can bring these things into your real world, there's kind of this ghostly presence that never really leaves you. And in a way that, you go into virtual reality, you are automatically being transported somewhere else versus
Mm-hmm.
things being transported to you.
Right.
So that experience went on into, went to film festivals, museums, everything. It was really, really impactful.
Awesome. Awesome. So you were talking about the story of Jadu. And
Yeah. So we kind of, again, the main factors here are the hardware for mobile phones has reached an inflection point where you can deliver really compelling things on mobile. The other big piece was the capture technique that we're using called volumetric video. It was hitting a point where you could actually condense the files so they could run on a mobile phone. So you're like, okay, these holograms, the reason we did them on high-end headsets is you just couldn't put them on a mobile phone. It would just like, melt. But now you were able to do that. And so we were looking at a couple things and saying like, okay, we really want to build out an augmented reality platform delivering the most rich form and complex form of AR that anyone's ever seen before, really going beyond a face filter. But we knew that there were a lot of building blocks to get there. And one of those big things is really even just familiarizing people with the idea of AR that is not on your face.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so to do that, we're like, look, everyone loves social media. What's a new type of thing that people haven't seen that really works well with performers, celebrities, musicians? And we were like, okay, if we can basically let you have a cameo with people like Lil Nas X in your bedroom, that's amazing. That's a really novel use case for AR that people haven't seen before. So we really kind of like honed in on how do we make these 15, 20-second musical performances that let you bring these artists, photoreal recreations of them, into your room and create content that you can then post on social media. And what we started to find was people that, when we were doing these experiences in film festivals and museums, a lot of this was like tech first movers, people that really were kind of like geeking out on the latest features. And the audience that we were reaching was not that at all. This was 13 to 17-year-old kids who they don't even know necessarily what augmented reality is, but they know that they want to do a cameo with their favorite artist. And to be able to reach that wide of a group so quickly, that was kind of like, aha, like this is kind of, we're getting towards mainstream adoption in a way that is a bit more rich. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been a really good jumping off point for our grand ambitions.
Okay. That's awesome. That's awesome. And then you had mentioned Asad, who's the CEO
CEO and founder.
yeah. So yeah, I'd love to learn a bit more about him.
Fascinating. I'm obviously biased, but I think he is a really interesting intersection of design thinking, directing, vision, and engineering. And you don't really see all of those in tandem. Maybe you get two out of those three, but for him, his kind come up was really, he was in school at Bennington College. He grew up in Pakistan, and he was in school at Bennington, and he was in an architecture class, and he saw and got his first introduction to a high-end AR headset, which was the HoloLens. And he was looking at it and really thinking, okay, people are using this for industrial use cases, enterprise use cases. No one's really doing anything particularly creative with these. And so he started to do little experiments. He turned, did an experience where he basically made himself have like a Harry Potter wand in one hand. He could flick his hand and it would do the gesture tracking and create spells. And kind of all of that started to snowball into Terminal 3, and then our second collaboration together, A Jester's Tale, where we started to examine, it's basically like a very complex CAPTCHA test where you're being asked by an AI to prove that you're human. And so this experience starts very simple, tap, what's 2 + 2, and it kind of evolves into a much more complex and rich experience. But through all of these tests, we were really, really pushing what's possible with AR. And that started to look like, we were using mentalist tricks to get people to say certain words as part of the experience. All sorts of just like pretty robust and nutty things that, again, we really want to push and let people see the potential of what this medium can do.
That's awesome. This is really interesting. I think that the kind of issues or problems that you mentioned in terms of high barriers to entry, it not being super accessible to everyone, that's something that I have seen in the NFT space and in the crypto space. It's something that comes up a lot, that there's so many people who they're interested in NFTs, and then once they start the process and then they hit their first roadblock, which might be like setting up your crypto wallet or transferring, Ethereum to MetaMask or whatever the roadblock is, they kind of like give up. Or maybe they get past that first roadblock and then they hit the next roadblock, maybe gas fees are really high or something, and then they just kind of give up. And it seems like it's just so new, and the technology itself needs a lot of improvements. There's just a lot of people that haven't fully like jumped in or dived in. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about, one, like how Jadu is approaching NFTs, and how Jadu is approaching kind of bringing more people from backgrounds that are maybe hesitant to explore new tech. How are y'all kind of onboarding those people?
So I think a couple pieces to it. So the first piece is really, how do we introduce more people to this in a simplified manner? So we are considering, there's this, large concept of the metaverse, right? Which is kind of, we're thinking of like the spatial web. This is where we're going to have all sorts of different types of worlds and collaborations that it can kind of move fluidly between different virtual spaces. For us, again, the virtual world and the idea of something like VR is really interesting. However, it still has you need kind of like a beefy computer, which maybe some folks have, or a VR headset, which probably even fewer folks have. And for us, most people have a phone, and the quality of phones and what they can deliver is getting better and better every year. So we wanted to, I think, first and foremost, create this idea of what we call the Mirrorverse, which is the augmented reality manifestation of the metaverse. So how all of these items that are digital native can actually transcend the virtual space in which they live into our physical reality through the Jadu app. I think one of the first barriers to entry is making technology not scary. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to deliver it for something that everyone has, which is a phone.
Right.
So that, I think, is first and foremost one of the largest things that is really helpful, and making it something where even now there are a couple apps that are doing this in different ways, but there's not as much emphasis on design. It's usually somewhat hacked together and is a little bit difficult to use. We really want it to be, you should have 3 taps and you've got a cool AR asset that's sitting there in AR that you can interact with. The second part is really tied around accessibility and removing some of the fear around blockchain and all the associated pieces. So we actually have a feature that we're building in. In a nutshell, we're going to be enabling all different NFT collections, whether they're 2D or 3D, to step into our Mirrorverse and have utility. So one example of that might be there's a collection of 3D characters called Meebits, and right now when you purchase them, whatever the cost is at the moment, you kind of get it. It's a cool asset. If you don't have developer skills, you're probably not going to be doing any sort of animation or putting it into worlds. We're kind of taking on that burden ourselves and saying, look, we've created a automated pipeline that lets all of these 3D characters work with a avatar control system. So all you have to do is connect your wallet, pull those assets in, and now you can play with them. And what's been interesting to see is for a lot of these collections and collectors, they love this. They're like, look, we don't necessarily want to build a whole AR app, have to maintain that, learn how best to use augmented reality. And we can be that solution for them. So we can really say, look, we're here to provide that value and that utility. And on top of that, we're starting to build things that really expand what's possible and work across a bunch of different collections. So one of those that we're actually releasing on Monday, it's a really good time to be talking, is a jetpack. So whether you have an alien collection or a voxel art style collection, whatever character you have, whatever avatar it might be, we're going to gift it with the power of flight if you get this jetpack. So that's really exciting. And then I think the third one is, look, if the price point for a lot of these NFT collections is too high, how do I even start to get involved in this if I don't have, $3,000, $4,000 to, and I think that's still on the low end for a lot of these collections. We're giving collectors the option to make their collection and their pieces either private or public. So if you're like, look, I'm building up a character, I want this to be the Kim Kardashian of the metaverse, I want people using it. I want people to be running around creating content, really having my character be kind of like a cameo in these other people's experiences. There's going to be an opportunity for people that do not necessarily have the resources to purchase NFTs themselves to still have a fun time and play with them and get used to it. Because again, I think there's so much terminology, myself included, is like, I don't know, I've been in XR for 4 or 5 years, made 40 projects, and I'm sitting here, my head swimming with all of the new terminology for NFTs and blockchain and which chain's the best one. And I think it can be super overwhelming. So the ability fundamentally for us to say, look, if you have collections and you're deep in the space, you have all this fun new stuff to do. If you've never even uttered the word NFT, you're also able to hop onto the app and play around with some fun characters and start to really understand the culture and communities that are building around them, which is fun.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a bi-directional onboarding. So it's like you're onboard. You can onboard people in the NFT space into like augmented reality tech, and then you can onboard people who are already interested in augmented reality but maybe not super familiar with NFTs, onboard them into engaging with NFTs as well through the platform.
Totally. And I think too is like, a dream scenario for me is there's a kid who plays Minecraft every day, loves it, sees a TikTok video of someone with kind of like a voxel character that isn't from Minecraft but is, let's say, a Meebit, and they're like, oh, that's an AR. Where do I play with that? How do I get involved with that side of things? And it kind of can bring in an even wider audience. But yeah, I think the 2 core pillars are definitely augmented reality enthusiasts, crypto NFT enthusiasts. And then as this kind of builds out and grows, there'll be a wider and wider swath of folks that get introduced to this.
Right. Cool. So what is your story? How did you find Jadu and get involved?
Yeah. So I was kind of getting towards graduation from college and was really, I knew 2 things. I really didn't want to wear a suit ever, which, well done for me. And I wanted to keep reading and writing, and that really quickly narrowed my options down in terms of different sectors. And I really landed on Hollywood as kind of like a jumping off place. Maybe I would stay, maybe I wouldn't. I wasn't someone who loved movies or loved television, but I liked the creative firepower that was kind of going on. So I ended up working at this talent agency called WME. I was working for a motion picture lit director agent who repped different writers and directors who were kind of these like indie darlings, the David Lowery's, the Cary Fukunaga's, the Ryan Cooglers of the world, who kind of went on to become these massive megastars in their own rights. And it was there that I fell in love with artists, and I loved this idea and seeing my boss really like being the conduit to bring their vision to life. And I was at the agency long enough to know being an agent wasn't for me. I ended up moving over to Hasbro Studios and kind of working there for a while. That's where I got the VR bug, put on a VR headset. And I think it happens to people. They just kind of like jump off the deep end. They're like, this is the future of everything. I can't do anything else. So that happened to me, and I basically quit my job at Hasbro, didn't have a job going into winter break. And I was like, I'm not taking another job until I can work in virtual reality. Like, this is where I want to be. Probably not the wisest choice, but sometimes you got to get kicked out the door to do it, right? So I landed at 2-Bit Circus, they were basically like Disney Imagineers for hire. They were doing everything you weren't supposed to do in VR at that time, which was like, this was peak 360 video. They were doing it. It's like, oh, keep the camera still. They're like, let's attach it to a spider rig and like rip it across a bunch of people. They're like, oh, let's put on a Formula One car and have that drive around and see how that makes people feel. And so I got this like really strong foundation of anything is possible. And that's, I think, really important in these kind of nascent spaces where there's a lot of push to kind of like standardize and make rules around things that, look, from an engineering side, sometimes you need it. But from a creative side, it's what pushes the medium forward. So I was able to really embed myself as a development executive, helping all this world-class engineers start to build out their own collections and own IP and think about, hey, we're doing less work for hire, let's do some original projects. And all this kind of culminated, we're almost there. All this kind of culminated in me ending up at Riot, which was Verizon Media and Verizon's kind of like content innovation arm. And this was at the intersection of like the 5G network really starting to roll out. And so I began to oversee all things immersive. That's when I did about 35, 40 projects that kind of ranged from, we did a virtual reality like civil rights museum exhibit with Time Magazine and the Martin Luther King estate. We did, projection mapping experiences for the United Nations Climate Action Summit. All of these kind of larger than life executions, while also doing and building out a web AR platform, which really fundamentally is, instead of having it on an app-based experience, being able to use your web browser to power something. Which is great because you can reach tons and tons of people. And during my time at Riot is where I met Asad, and I had really just been getting into AR, and he opened my eyes, I think, really widely to how far it could be pushed, because all this incredible stuff was happening in VR, and there was very little happening in AR at the time. And for me, this entire kind of narrative thread is anchored around this idea that I really, really love complex problem solving. And I love pulling off miracle projects, despite the stress that it does induce. But so it's a really, I think this intersection of AR and NFTs is one of those moments where it's, people are trying to figure out, and people are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on NFT collections. They can't do anything with them. They can change their profile picture, and that's kind of like the end of it. And that works in the context of art really well and is, I think, fine. But in the context of this march towards, whatever the metaverse becomes, the idea that these need to be, the metaverse will be built on interactivity. And in order to get to that point, you have to understand what is the utility and value that these can have beyond a kind of like platformless social network, which again is in its own right super interesting, right? So that's kind of like the loose journey of Jake Sally into present day.
That's awesome. I feel like you have been able to go through a journey of exploring different things that you like and one thing leading to another. But then to end up in like a senior role at a or executive role at a startup in a really exciting, like innovative industry, that's pretty cool. You know, like I feel like I don't know how old you are, but I feel like that it seems like that may have happened kind of quickly.
Yeah, I'm 32, so
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I
Um,
love seeing young people
yeah.
running startups. It's great.
Look, I mean, one of my big reasons leaving traditional Hollywood was I was sitting here looking at it and you're like, you look around, you're like, okay, we've got assistants that have been assistants for like 4 years. We've got like junior executives and junior executives for like 5 years. This arc is just, it's like in and of itself, if you're not prepared to to level up, that's totally reasonable. But I think this kind of like archaic perspective of where just you need to like pay your dues for like 15 years is absolutely ludicrous. And I mentor a couple kids that are in college right now. And my number one thing is like, look, if you step in early to these new spaces, you can skip whole, decades of your life just working your way up the ladder, largely because there are definitely experts in a lot of these spaces, but very often there's not even enough data. The stuff is too nascent
Yeah.
that no one's an
Yeah.
expert. And the expertise comes through doing. And
Right.
that I think is really powerful. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that, I
Right.
think, at Riot and Two Bit Circus, honestly.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. I think anybody who's ambitious and wants to accomplish a lot, wants to go far, is really needs to look into like innovative tech. If they're not already, like they definitely need to lean into it, because whether you're in marketing, sales, like design, engineering,
Hmm.
whatever, all of those fields will apply to this new industry, but um, there's still expertise that has to be developed like in that industry. You know, even in NFTs, for
Yeah.
example, people will come to me and be like, well, what does the data say about XYZ? And I'm like, I'm sorry to break it to you, but
Yeah.
there is no data. Like, this is so new.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is what I have seen and what others around me have seen from being in this industry for the last 8 months or however long. um
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I thought was just so absolutely, there are two, I think, hilarious things that are happening right now. One, I was like really deep in VR, as people would ask when we were either co-financing or looking to seek financing for a project, people would ask for like a 3-year projection. You're like, that's just like, it's complete nonsense. Is
yeah.
you're like, there's going to be so many new headsets, so many new changes, and like the fundamental technology to even deliver this, that to deliver a financial projection is a kind of a fool's errand
Yeah.
at this point. And like a large part of it is you're putting your stake in the ground to say, I believe, and this is why,
Yeah.
that I think this is the path that it could go down. The other one is really seeing these job descriptions where people are like, hey, we're looking for someone with like 8 years of blockchain experience. You're like, I mean, there are people out there definitely that have that, but you're like, I need 8 years of blockchain experience and like 6 years of Hollywood, like franchise management. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Where does this person exist? I've never met a
Yeah.
person even remotely like that.
Right. And the chances that they're gonna be in this industry or looking at this industry, if they do exist. um
It's some hardcore unicorn hunting for sure,
yeah.
but
I think
um,
what's also dope about being in a space like this is that, or being in like an innovative space like this, and I
mm,
can say NFTs from my perspective, is that even though you can't predict what's going to happen in the future, you can't predict, even 1 year from now what the projections are going to be, so you can't necessarily raise money raise funding or support in that way. I just went through the process of raising funding for an exhibit, a virtual NFT exhibit. There's only been a handful of like big virtual NFT exhibits, and this is probably from what I know, this is one of the few that is happening at this scale. And so, you know, when I was talking to different companies to sponsor, it was like the ones that didn't understand the industry were so kind of confused about why, like, what we were even trying to do. Whereas people who were familiar, and they had a lot of like kind of like granular questions, and the people who were familiar with crypto, familiar with NFTs, were like, we know that this is a gamble. We know that there's no way to know how this is going to do. We can pump this as great as we, you know, as much as we want to, and there may be auctions that pop off and, you know, sell for really high, and that may not happen. They may all flop. Like, you really don't know, but they understand that, like, the only way to know what's possible in a space like this is to try. And it allows you to actually then create the future. Like, it allows you to pave the way for like how this industry develops and like make history. And so that's been really cool.
Yeah, and I love that approach, and it really is. Yeah, you're like, look, we have to make the data set ourselves. Someone has to, and I think what's been really, this is very reminiscent. Like, the NFT space is very reminiscent of like XR a couple years ago, which was why I got into it. It was like, oh, you know, you're not dealing with like the Hollywood knife fights where it's just like people are fighting so aggressively over things. You're like, there are very few competitors. Almost everyone's a potential partner. And that kind of like collective mindset, I think it's one of my favorite things in business is I can get on a phone, even if someone else has an NFT collection, or there's another, I have yet to really see another AR NFT app that is kind of like very particularly robust, but look, there's always an opportunity for it. And yeah, you really do have to try some things, and some of them are going to be a little crazy, but you know, I say this a lot is most people, they're not in it for the yacht money. They're in it because it's a fundamental stamp on the future of this technology and the culture that's being built. And it's really important that it's built by people that care about it beyond the simple financial returns, which again are great, very big part of it, but it is much more meaningful as this technology kind of marches towards becoming ubiquitous. How do we want it to be built, and what is the future state that we want to be in? And I think for us, it's very much like this idea of an AR, I don't like saying aggregator, but AR platform that welcomes all different types of communities and gives them more things to do and more ways to play is kind of, it's what keeps me up at night anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of what makes it exciting. You know, I dream about collectibles and NFTs.
What collectible? What's one you're dreaming about right now?
I haven't. You know, it's actually been a few days, or maybe like a week, since I had a really deep dream. But last weekend, or maybe about a week and a half ago, there was like a bunch of NFT collectibles that were dropping around the same time. So you had Afro Droids, you had there was this like Rebel Kids drop, you had the Alien drop. I forgot what that one was called.
D-Gens? Was that the D-Gens?
No.
Different one?
I think it was like man, I can't remember. You had the Wanderers, you have the man, I'm forgetting a lot of their names, but there was like,
no, it's like, I mean, the volume is really hit like at a kind of insane level.
And I have recently started getting more into buying collectibles and sometimes selling them for a profit. And But once you get really deep into it, you start, I think you start to really kind of stress about whether or not you're making the right decision. Like if I pick this one versus that one, you know what I mean? And right now, like a lot of these collectibles are pretty expensive. So you're talking about dropping maybe anywhere from like $400, $500 to maybe $1,000, upwards of $1,000 on something, and you want to know that you're making the right decision. So I think the last thing I remember was having a weekend of like really deep sleep, where I just was like just thinking about collectibles a lot. I don't remember explicitly, but it was very much on my mind.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, it's I think there's definitely, it's similar to social media. You're like, human brain isn't designed to like handle the cognitive load of like thousands of communities or people. I think what I'm starting to see a little bit is people, there's kind of like this expansion where people join a bunch of different discords and communities and buy the collections. And before it was just like you bought the art or the NFT for whatever reason, and there was kind of like the financial component. Now there's all these incentives for you to be really participating in communities, which I think on one hand is tough because you're like, well, I can't participate in all of these communities. I have like 50 NFTs of whatever price point. I just can't engage in all of these. So there's like kind of this like shrinking where people choose their 2 or 3 nations that they're gonna be a part of. And then on the other hand, I will say I think this is one of the most beneficial things that is happening, which is you could have 0 ETH in a wallet setup, maybe like 0.1 ETH in a wallet setup. And if you are really actively engaged and creative in one of these communities, I think the potential to be gifted one is maybe not super high, but it's high enough that there's a real likelihood that it's dropping some of the barrier to entry, which is really positive.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of gifting happening in the NFT space, gifting of Ethereum and gifting of NFTs as well.
Yeah. Which is great. It's like you just like would not see that in a bunch of other industries.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, because I know we just have like a few minutes left, you had asked a question about Black people and NFTs. I don't remember the exact question, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think for me, they're all, community is used ad nauseum in this space, and I think given historically how Black people have been shut out of a lot of these technologies, from filmmaking to kind of whether it's VR or some of these other spaces, I was super interested to know, with you so intimately involved with this collision, the Venn diagram of Black culture and NFTs, how do you feel? Do you feel like things are, what's giving you hope? What do you feel like the big differentiators are, and where do you feel like is a good entry point for the Black community to enter into this? And yeah, I mean that's all.
Yeah.
It's a lot to cover in 2 minutes, but I believe.
What was the very first question?
What do you see as, I guess really to simplify it, what's the vibe of the Black NFT culture in your mind?
Yeah. So I would say that there's a lot I could say. There's a lot to say. So I would say, one, I think that it's a vibrant community. I think that people have been able to come together and find each other and connect in a way that has been imperative for a lot of people in this space, in that if they didn't have that community to support them, sorry, that's my dog.
It's okay.
If they didn't have that community to support them, there's probably a strong possibility they would not be in the space right now, right? So I think that being able to come into the space, find Black people quickly and connect with them, build relationships, get that exposure from other people, which was a big part of the work that we did, because when we first joined the NFT space, there really wasn't many Black people at all, and it was hard to find them. The one community that we found was called One Off, and they had a Discord channel. The Discord channel was like difficult to get into, and it wasn't very public facing, right? So it was like, how do you create something that's more public and visible so that when people first enter the space, it's like super, super easy to find you and get engaged. And then maybe from there, you kind of funnel into some of the smaller, more private, more intimate communities. So that was a big part of the work that we did with Black NFT art, through Clubhouse events and social media posting and everything. And so I think now you see this community of people that are active, that are engaged, that are selling their art, that are collecting, that are starting to create their own organizations and projects, getting jobs at different NFT platforms and so forth. But at the end of the day, the Black community is still a very, very tiny fraction of the entire NFT space. And so I think that's something that you don't really see when you're kind of like in that community and that's all you see. But once you pull out a bit, which is part of the work that I've had to do recently, you start to realize how small the Black community really is. The average like Discord channel that black people are in is maybe as much as like anywhere from 150 to maybe 250 people, whereas some of these other NFT communities have 10,000 plus people in them. So you're talking about a really, really small community of people, and I think that a lot of the Black people who come into this space and they find community amongst other Black people here, I think they can get very comfortable and kind of then self-isolate. And so that is something that I think that we need to work on, is how do we maintain that level of like comfort and safety that we have with each other while also still building relationships with other communities in the NFT space, so that we can all kind of like grow together and support each other together.
Yeah. It's great. I love that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see how things evolve. But I mean, again, even in the last 6 months, I feel like there's been a complete refresh of the space. So I like the pace at which things are evolving and iterating.
Yeah, I agree. I think also something that we're going to see more so in the NFT space in general, but also amongst like Black communities, is like political conversations. Because people are starting to talk about, people are starting to pull, from political issues or from like people's like personal values into this space. And I think you're starting to see like people disagreeing on like what type of art is acceptable, and what kind of behavior in the space is acceptable. Some people feel like if you're in the space and you don't actively contribute, you're not engaged all the time, and you create NFTs, that you don't deserve to be supported, versus someone who's like very embedded in the community. And so I think we're going to see an interesting kind of dynamic of people trying to figure out like, what does it mean to what does community actually mean in the context of NFTs, and like, are there going to be like strict rules about who's allowed and what it takes to be here or not, and who enforces that? How like I think it's different from some other communities, and that you're seeing people really kind of want to establish rules and boundaries and values, and I think that's going to be interesting to see play out.
I love that. Oh, well, I feel like we're in good hands with you, Iris. We're gonna get to those community guidelines.
Well, I'm actually not the person that's trying to set those guidelines.
But so. you're asking the questions which are more important, because I think people get very heads down, and you don't know what you don't know, and to be able to step back and have that perspective is really important for people to kind of always be questioning. And we tried to do that in XR, and I think it went okay. But I think this space in particular, it's needed. It's very needed.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It,
Yeah.
well, it was great to have you. It was really cool to learn about Jadu. Is there anything else that you want to share about the company or what you have coming up, what you've worked on?
Yeah, so we've got our first big utility NFT drop on Monday. So that'll be the jetpacks, and these are designed to they're metaverse ready. It's going to let any of your 3D avatars that you have fly. So we're adding support for more and more collections every single day,
Nice.
and we'll be relaunching the app to kind of do the full crypto wallet integration, so you can bring your collections into AR. And we're really aiming to make this as easy and fun for people as possible.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
what is Jadu's vision? If y'all have a vision for, the next the near future.
Yeah. So our vision for let's call it the next year or so, is really to build out an augmented reality platform with support for a really wide range of metaverse IP that's going to build um, games, utility, and functionality to let people explore the real world around them
Mm-hmm.
with all of their fun collections from the metaverse.
Okay. Awesome. Cool. Cool, cool. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. It was great to meet you. Um, let me find my closing script. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. You can listen to the NFT Roundtable on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and you can find the podcast episodes as well on our website at blacknftart.co/nft-roundtable-podcast. We're going to be launching a new website soon, so we'll keep y'all updated on that. And you can follow us on Instagram at NFT Roundtable, just one word, NFT Roundtable. And we will see y'all next time.